My name is Louise Olof-Ors. For anyone who doesn't know me, I am the president of the History of Art Society, and it's my pleasure to be hosting this conversation with Jann Haworth. Our society is primarily made up of art history students and young art historians who are all studying together at the University of Warwick, but I'm also happy to welcome what looks like to be a range of other guests who are here with us today as well. If I can briefly introduce Jann Haworth, she is a pioneer of soft sculpture and a feminist artist, and participated very widely in the pop aesthetic as well in the UK. And she is a Hollywood native and started her career in the 1960s in London as a student at the Courtauld and the Slade, as an art history student at the Courtauld and art at Slade. And she's been working between the UK and the US ever since. Her works are exhibited in museums and collections around the world, including the Smithsonian, Palland House, Hirshhorn Museum, and Tate Britain, amongst many. And is currently exhibited at Gazzelli Art House in a solo exhibition entitled Mannequin Defectors until the 13th of March. So that was a very brief introduction, but I think maybe your studies are a perfect place to start, since we ourselves are students, and you were actually studying art history as well. So if we could start perhaps with you telling us about your early career and the kind of work you were doing when you were very young. I have slides ready, but we can jump around anywhere you like. So, yeah.
Sure. Well, yes, and hello, all of you who are there. It's a pleasure to be with you today. And imagine Warwick. I know the area well, and I know the situation of the university and so forth, because my daughter nearly went there, so we did a couple of visits up there with that in mind. My early kind of initiation, I guess you would say, to art really came through my parents. They were both artists. My father was in the film industry, first working for Disney as what was known as an in-betweenie, which means that you did, when he was right out of college, Southern California College, he did that kind of artwork for Disney, which means you do the bits between action. And then my mother was a ceramicist early on, and then a printmaker later on. So I really grew up with, art every which way I turned. And my determination was really not to do art. I went into UCLA as a philosophy student with an English minor, with all that in mind, and thought that the last thing in the world I would do would be art, because everybody else in my family did it. In my second year, though, I just flipped. And I remember calling my mother saying that, guess what, I'm going to change my major to art, like I had discovered it all of a sudden. And so anyway, and then the opportunity came up for my father, who was working on a film in France called The Longest Day, to travel to Europe. And the idea of seeing, the things that I had just been studying in art history just was too wonderful to pass up. And so I went to France in 1961. And was with him for about 6 months before going to England. Then applied. As soon as I got to England, I knew I wanted to stay for a period of time, and I applied to get into various art schools and universities, not really knowing that in England you apply a year or more in advance. And I kind of naively thought I could just go to the university with my transcripts and they would be very welcoming. And that wasn't the case, but the Courtauld took me in, and so did the Slade. So I didn't wander about forever. Anyway, and those two experiences were absolutely formative, because coming from California, this kind of structuring within the university, after 2 years, I was really ready for studio practice and diving deeper into art history. And with the museums and so forth that were available suddenly to me, which of course in California they were not, was just, heaven. And I certainly would say that the first 6 to 9 months at the Slade my sense of the rapid development of ideas and so forth was just so fast. There was so much stimulus so that in the theater and in exhibitions and in music and so forth that it really was the most wonderful experiences, and I'll never underestimate the impact of both those institutions of learning. They were seminal in terms of my formation. So yeah, I mean, early stuff. The first slide is of flowers, and that was a piece that I did when I was still at the Slade. I was trying to find a way really of expressing flowers in a way that was original. And I was sitting on the top of a number 30 bus, kind of musing over the idea of, well, I could do it as something made of wood or something made of plaster, or I could do a painting of flowers. And none of that suited the idea. And that's always been the genesis for me, is to take the idea and then find the form for it. I don't do it the other way around. So form follows idea. And to me, flowers were soft and warm. And so the idea of doing them in wood or in metal or in some other form was, completely contradictory to the subject itself. And it suddenly struck me that I could make them in cloth. Many flowers that we see, artificial flowers, are made of silk or fabric anyway, so that worked. But the idea too then immediately struck me that gloves, which you'll see a white flower on the right-hand side, gloves are like a flower. If you put the hands together, it's like petals of a flower. And then I, thought there were a good many kind of rather amusing things, like a snapdragon being like a zipped up mouth. As a child, my mother used to occupy my mind with giving me some bread, and I would go and feed the snapdragons. You open their mouths and you stick a little bread in there. So there were a number of things like that. And the idea of the flowers coming out of a sewage pipe instead of a vase, that appealed to me. So I was jumping into metaphor and really finding that, very interesting and kind of engaging. So that's a student work, but then, because of that work, I wanted to make other things that went with that work. So I made a dog, and then an old lady to go with the dog, and so it went on. And soft seemed to be the topics that I was interested in. All had that uniform feeling. And also, I didn't like the kind of alien feeling of you touch a brass sculpture of a face and it's cold and rather inhuman. So the idea of working in cloth was, very natural for me, because my mother had taught me to sew when I was 8. I made a petticoat and then a skirt and then an apron and then a blouse and so forth. And then by the age of 10, 11, I was making all my own clothes. And so the knowledge of turning two-dimensional surfaces, i.e. fabric, into three-dimensional form was something that was already in my head. I knew that language. And I think, that abstraction is really interesting, that you know that if you make something on the bias, it will go in a curve. And too, that the shape of an arm, the anatomy of an arm in a figure, in a piece of clothing is shaped like a kind of horseshoe shape with a curve the other way and then down. So you have this internal image of what anatomy is based on tailoring, really. So that is the kind of genesis of these kinds of figures, and the idea of making a three-dimensional figure that occupied a space life size seemed a very natural fit, because that comes out of the kind of conceits of surrealism within the film industry. So the film industry has figures in a set. It has props like the donuts I've made, or it has the life-size component. It has, something that would be, something that questions your size, like the charm bracelet, which is 9 feet long. So it's one of those things where the film language is woven into the surrealism of these pieces. And I'm called a pop artist, but I'm probably equally as surrealist, I think, if not predominantly. So, something like the charm bracelet is a narrative of the holidays that I took with my family, and each charm represents a different holiday. And the bracelet here, I actually had this bracelet, only it was stolen. So I made a large version of it to kind of commemorate that. The other thing that comes up a little bit in my work is things made in white, which is certainly not derivative of Claes Oldenburg, because at the time I was making these, he was still engaged with paper mache pieces and beginning to work with cloth and with his then wife. It was something where he didn't know of my work, I didn't know of his work, but we actually made things at exactly the same time in fabric as sculptural material. Please do feel free if there's any questions to break in and anything you want clarified. We can go back to the images that are concerned with those things. But we'll clip on if you want to go to the next slide and talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I like most people will know this is an open forum Q&A as well. So if you have a question, just raise your hand in Microsoft. I actually had a question concerning the pop element that you were just talking about defining yourself as a pop artist or as a realist and etc. And I think when I've been investigating your work, I'm really interested in looking at how you both completely confined to certain aspects of both British and American pop art, but also completely defy others and this definition, and how you often get tied into them, but that there is something much more complex that I think as young art historians or beginning art historians, we should look at questioning these eras. So, for example, I was wondering with your such personal connection to Hollywood, I would say in the art history that we have studied, British pop artists are incredibly skeptic and cynical towards American celebrity, and yet it's such a part of your own life and upbringing, and it makes a big part of your artistic career as well that I would love to look at and explore.
Yeah, there's a lot there, and pull me up on anything that I skip over from that sort of survey. I think, first of all, just cutting back to being an art history student, I feel your situation directly, because when I was studying art history, it was much more reductionist than what you probably are experiencing. And there's a simple reason for that you all understand. You reduce the subject to the most easily conveyed units because it's such a vast subject. How can you possibly include, Middle Eastern art, African art, Asian art, in the first kind of preliminary first year art history course? So things are reduced, and artists that don't fit neatly into boxes sometimes are marginalized. I won't say that's happened to me particularly. I don't really know. But I think one wants definitions of a particular type of art to be clear, and in so doing, in a way, you impose a vision over it that is both useful for getting getting the hang of an idea or an artistic area, but it also can be eliminative, that you leave out kind of nuances within a particular artist's work. So an artist may be represented, as Marat Oppenheim is, by the fur teacup, but we never see her trussed up chicken, i.e. high heel shoes. So I think I think it's important to say that it's a little bit messy. And you guys are going to have to deal with messy edges of things that may fascinate you, but there'll be whole chunks of stuff that's left out because it doesn't fit. And that's just the way our brains work, and I mean, alas, I think it's one of those things you can only bear so much information, and as you enter this subject, there's just simply so much, and to become an expert in one area or following the kind of wonderful response that you have to a particular area is probably the best one can do, and that's pretty frustrating in some ways. So I think going back to Hollywood and origins and the difference between perhaps the British attitude towards Hollywood, I would say a little caveat there that yes, there was cynicism from say Derek Bosher maybe doing a Kellogg's Corn Flakes package or that sort of thing, but there was a luscious kind of consumption of American stuff. It might have been a kind of grudging delight, but I mean, Peter Blake and various other people, they loved the Beach Boys or they loved the Beatles. It wasn't that it was something that was a negative response. So when people painted Marilyn, or they painted the icons of Americana, let's call it. I'm not so sure that it was as cynical as it might be if you ask them now. I'm not, saying that they're revising their history, but there was a delight in the hot dog that Colin Self did. It's not that it's necessarily all critique, and so I think that American culture is obviously immensely impactful on the world, as is British, as French, and so forth. And I think it is one of those things that you can love and hate it at the same time, or be a little cynical about it and embrace it. So I think I am often on two channels because something will strike me as very ironic and very funny. I don't like sarcasm, but I do like irony, and so I'll play a double game with things, both kind of laughing at the fact that donuts are sassy, and also that every morning for high school, I stopped at the Big Donut Drive-In for my cup of coffee and my donut. So it's embedded. But it also is a topic that I use, to cause some trouble. Does that more or less cover some of the things you wanted me to cover?
Yeah, absolutely. I realized it was maybe too large of a question, but that was perfect.
Okay, well, yeah. Well, the donuts, I mean, this particular piece on the right-hand side there is I would like this to be a test question for you on an exam about art history of the 20th century, so that you have to identify the art ism that each of those donuts are. So if you would speak to your professors about that, each one of those kind of covers an ism. There are a few leaks out the side of that. It was meant to be all works representing works that were by male artists, but I couldn't resist a fur donut to go with Merritt Oppenheim's fur teacup, so that's in there. And then I was present when Yoko Ono and her then husband, her first husband, did the performance in the black bag, so I had to have two donuts in a black bag as one of those. So it broke the kind of, hey, this is all about male dominant art type stuff. So anyway, but that, things like that is there, that both makes me laugh and is serious at the same time. So it kind of covers that point. I started making the donuts when I was a student, and I had this illusion that I could make something that was really easy to make and that I could sell it for a really low price. It's always been important to me that I don't really like the fact that art is so expensive, because it excludes the very people that I would like to have the art. And I really did try to sell them, but nobody bought them. I thought it was such a great idea that I was completely perplexed at my one of my early entries into the art market. They've sold now. Do you want to go to the next slide? See what we've got?
Yeah, absolutely. We have the charm bracelet, which you described. Then we have Mae West, which would be a brilliant
Yeah, and I guess we could, turn on this a little bit, doing, back to your Hollywood question. That for me, growing up in Hollywood, I did have this particularly peculiar fact that my father would take me to the set all the time. I mean, he wanted me to see the sets that he was building, and it didn't matter if they were shooting or if it was, in construction. I mean, I was the only child there that I ever saw, and it didn't seem that he knew that nobody else took their kid to work. But anyway, there I was, and so I saw this process really in every aspect, from the props to the plaster casting to the latex substitutes of the actors that were in Body Snatchers, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. All of that was part and parcel of a childhood. So, I mean, he would let me loose while he had to do something, and I would play on the back lot on the sets, or in France, or, in some area that was being built on the back lot at Universal Studios or something. And to me, I saw a level world. I saw, women as costume designers and part of the matrix that made a film. I saw, the actors and actresses as no more important than the carpenter, because they were walking around in their pajamas, or they were, being made up. They were not glamorous. They were just other people. And to a young child, of course, an adult actor, it doesn't really matter if it's Marlon Brando or Marilyn Monroe. It's not that impressive, because you're not given to the kind of celebrity area. You're not interested in that. So I saw this level world, and when I came to Europe, I was kind of a bit put off about the fact that people actually would go and get autographs, because that was a really naff thing to do in Hollywood. And that the kind of the celebrity culture was something that had a role, and to me it wasn't there. And the idea of Marilyn Monroe being a goddess, yes, we all know that, but she's not a very interesting goddess to a woman, really. I mean, you feel a competition with that kind of beauty or something like that. But she wasn't, known as a brain, whereas Mae West is, infinitely more interesting, really smart, very odd, not beautiful, and yet she pulls it off, this kind of glamour mode. So I think, that's why I did Mae West, because to me, she was a much more fabulously curious person. And so, this piece is at Pallant House. And the idea of using light in my work has always been something I really like to do. I've had less opportunity to do it than I would like, but I really like lights in relationship to fine art, and how you light things is important to me. And the idea of this surreal situation where you are in the position of Mae West, as if you're making yourself up. So if you sit in front of this piece, and it really is meant to be sat in front of, you line up with what is her image. And the odd thing that happens is that if you line your eyes up, it looks like she's blinking. So that's pretty weird. That was just an accident of making. But the double images are not there. So you get a very strange feel. I mean, it's a real object, the other side of this faux mirror. So there is that kind of, real question mark over reality in the piece. Anyway, it's a piece that has a lot going on that I won't go deeply into, but I think for me it brings together a number of threads that particularly interest me. So yeah. Do you want to go to the next one?
Yeah, absolutely. Next we have the Maid.
Yeah, I'll tell you the story of this. It's a little long, but I was commissioned by somebody called Vic Lowndes to make a birthday present for Hugh Hefner, and the idea was that this figure was going to be a bunny girl, and she was going to go first class on a plane to Chicago and be presented to Hugh Hefner for his birthday. It didn't happen that way, because when I took her for the fitting at the Bunny Club, basically she was abused. I mean, she was sitting next to me, and the men who were the kind of minders of the bunnies, the waitresses in the Bunny Club, kept coming by and groping her and, you know, making rude comments and, you know, all of that. And it was so gross. And I was kept waiting. I was there on time. The woman who was to do the fitting didn't, you know, materialize. She just kept me waiting. And I just got really angry and walked out with the figure and canceled the commission. And I, you know, already put a lot of work into the figure itself, and thought, well, you know, now who did she become? And the idea behind her was to make the ideal woman. So my idea at the time was that I wanted her to be a fusion of ethnicity, so that she was African American, Native American, Asian, and Caucasian and Hispanic. So I wanted all those cultures to be pushed together into this figure. So she is a combination of all women. And anyway, so when I got her home, I don't know if this is really very logical thinking, but I decided that she needed to be a French maid. That's what she became. So the maid is not working. She's sitting and she's relaxed, probably in the home of the person she works for, because she's in her uniform. And I don't know what her attitude is. I think my logic left off at that point. She is. And, you know, the fact is she is not engaged in labor at this point. So I leave the interpretation to you all.
Yeah, I was about to say it's very telling that she's left the bunny club to recline in a chair. So, but yeah, I was wondering if there's anyone with any questions, because I've been made aware that the comment section is not working. So perhaps if this is a good time for someone to put on their mic if they're interested. And if there's not, we can just move on. That's fine as well.
Yeah, just a brief description of the space. That's my studio. To the right is a wardrobe by Joe F. Grave that I had done. He's the person who did the drum on Sgt. Pepper. To the left of the overmantel piece there is a work by Richard Lydner. And to the left of that is a painting called Apparitio by Peter Blake. Oh, and there's a Betjeman bear there. That's kind of dumb sculpture, but there it is.
I have a picture of the Betjeman bears in my slides, actually, just after this, because I was very surprised when you sent me the Betjeman bears. And there was a picture with Twiggy. I think it went perfect with your love-hate relationship with all of these Hollywood celebrities. So
yeah, well, Betjeman is a British poet, but I have a love-hate relationship with some of my work too. I have to say that. You know, there are certain things that I've done that I go, you know. I mean, I'm fairly savage from time to time about what I do, and Betjeman kind of didn't work. I liked his poetry, and I just don't like it at all now, and not as a vendetta, because I decided to make a Valentine for him because I thought he was such a sweet man. And the Valentine was to do this bear because he collected bears, and he had his bear from when he was a child. And I sent it in a taxi to him, and he hated it. Of course he did. So that kind of misfired. But anyway, Twiggy liked it, so that made up for it.
Yeah, and it makes for an amazing poster as well for the Robert Fraser poster. I was quite struck by it.
Yeah, all that. Do you want to go back to whatever we just skipped through? Not that, but the one before that. Yeah. This picks up on the all-white figure and the idea of the body snatchers. That was what was in my mind. There was my father was making the film The Body Snatchers, and there was an episode where he wanted to have. He said, "Jann, do you know how to do paper mache?" And I said, "Yes." I think I was 14 or 13 or something. And I said, "Yes," which wasn't true. He said, "Because this weekend, what I'd like to do is, I have a problem. We need to make something that these false figures come out of, and I'd like a cocoon or a seed pod or something like that. Let's make one. And so I neglected the idea. I didn't know that you were supposed to make paper mache over chicken wire. So we, I thought you just wodged newspaper together with flour and water paste, and I did that, and it just got bigger and bigger till it was about like a large turkey. And this thing was kind of like a seed pod, but a little bit like a chrysalis. And I said, well, and the next thing you have to do is you have to put it in the oven and cook it to dry it on a low temperature. So we did that, and the whole kitchen smelled of burning ink. It was really horrid. And about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we decided to take this thing out, and it was crisp on the outside, so it was cooked. And we took it out, but the tray that it was on went clunk onto the door of the oven, and the whole inner wet wodge came erupting out of it. And my father just went, "That's it. That's it. How it has to be." And it really is like that in the film. This kind of thing goes blup out of the inside of this kind of leaf-shaped pod, which is really grotesque. Anyway, so that, long story short, whiteness and the Body Snatchers is the reason some of my work is white, because it goes through the plaster shop, through a latex falsification of reality, and then is either painted or something to make it more real. And the surfer, another life-size figure, it's in the Ludwig collection. It's really much more interesting if it doesn't have its skin on, and I wish I'd left it that way, but I didn't. So there he is. Yeah, that was really me deciding that I really should have studied anatomy at the Slade, and I avoided it. So yeah.
Yeah, and these are also, I've seen from this kind of Hollywood tradition as well, of the body double type. This is the same kind of relationship, isn't it?
Yeah, the same thing, a substitute reality. And you can say that of art. I mean, we could take the whole thing down and say there's no pop art, there's no surrealism. Art is a kind of substitute, a faux, a fiction of reality, and it's all the same. That we fictionalize, we subsume, something into bronze or into plaster or into marble. That we're playing a kind of substitution game. So yeah.
Yeah. If I move on to the next slide, is that good? Then.
Yeah.
And we have, of course.
You all know this, and I won't drone on about it. There's a figure of Shirley Temple on the right-hand side with the old lady that we saw earlier. As far as I'm concerned, this is a set. The idea of doing it as a life-size thing was mine, and the Sgt. Pepper drum was my friend Joe F. Grave. I didn't want any lettering on the front of the cover to be done by a graphic designer, so I suggested that the title of the album could be on the drum. The Beatles had said they would be holding instruments, so the drum was a logical addition. And the idea of doing the lettering of the Beatles themselves was based on the idea of a little civic sculpture thing that was near us in Chiswick at the time, in Hammersmith. Lettering being a part of the actual artwork was really, really key to me. And we could go on and on about who's represented and stuff, but note that there were only 12 women, 6 of whom are fictional. And that's what drove later projects for me to say it isn't good enough. There are too many failures in the cover, and that politically we were all very naive and foolish at the time, I think. So yeah, I was 24, so I'm maybe I'm excused. So.
Yeah, and it's exactly this that made me want to ask you about your revisiting of the images that you've redone continually in the last few years. So
yes.
In the next slide have yours and your daughter Liberty Blake's reinterpretation of the image, and I would love to hear about that.
Yeah, and in 2003, Rolling Stone said that they did a list of the greatest albums of all time, and Sgt. Pepper was number 1. And whilst I was fully aware of the fact that that's the music, not the cover, later they put the cover as number 1. And I I think it's a flawed work. And at that time in 2003, I thought, well, really what I want to do is to do a mathematical analysis of the cover, which I did. And the 12 women question came up and I was pretty horrified. And so I did a mural for Salt Lake called SLC Pepper, which equalizes the women that are women that are represented in the mural are equal to men, and furthers the kind of ethnic diversity. And the idea then was that, that would probably be temporary, but it's still there. You can look it up. It's called SLC Pepper. After that, I did a comic strip for an exhibition I had at Wolverhampton. And the idea in the comic strip was, it was a comic strip called Mannequin Defectors, was that these mannequins were walking away from store windows and artist studios, and they were marching, carrying placards of women's artwork and wearing corsets that were paintings by men. And at one point, they pass a work of art in the street, which is a piece of street art, which is a poster of all women in that kind of crowd format. And I realized as soon as I began that, how little I knew. I mean, it was only a comic strip frame this big. There were only perhaps 30 women in it. And I didn't know any women mathematicians, no women astrophysicists. I didn't know very much about medical advances that have been promulgated by women. It was, like I was really didn't know my own history. And that so horrified me. I thought that really what I should do is an all women mural. And so that is the genesis of this mural. And this is a community mural, which means that the portraits that you see there are portraits done on paper using the stencil graffiti process. So you cut a photograph into a stencil and then you stencil with paint onto paper. And a person with little or no art training can make a recognizable portrait. So this mural now has 15 panels and it's 60 feet long. This is the first 7 panels, and there are about 300 portraits in this particular mural. And it's diverse in that it's women from all over the world. So it isn't centered on any one area or any one time. So there are both historical and contemporary women in this. And then Liberty took all of these paper collages, paper portraits, and then collaged them into these panels, which physically are 8 foot by 4 foot. I don't know what that is in meters, but they're large. And so it's, it's rather large, the whole mural now. It's on show at a place called the Granary, in Ephraim in Utah. And very nice installation. If you go to the Granary, have a look at that. And and then from that, do we have the Utah women mural slide? Do we have that?
Yes, I do at the very end. I just need to move through this slide. I have the mannequin defector comic as well.
We can go back through it. How's our time?
It's like 45 past. So maybe if we have, I think the meeting might be scheduled for an hour. So maybe if we do it a little bit longer and see if there are any questions, and then we.
Okay. All right. So do you want me to talk about the one that's on the screen now?
If you like, you was the one you were just.
I'll be brief so we can get through the rest of them. But that's the mannequin defectors, and that is the little frame that I mentioned earlier with the mannequins sort of marching in front of it. And to the right are pieces that I've done in cardboard that echo the experience that we had when we went to DC in 2017 on the Women's March. I was really struck by the fact that people did art for the march. In other words, they were carrying homemade signs that were so diverse and so, personal and so inventive. And they were in costume and they were, really there was so much passion and interest and intelligence in that march that I really wanted to do a series about that. So I took the materials of the march of chalk and pastel and card and made a series of works. I won't go into the whole concept of them because they're about version and inversion and about diptychs. I'd love to talk to you about diptychs and how hard it is to do a diptych. And all of that, if you ever want to dive deep into the kind of the compositional aspects of doing diptychs and also collage using reverse and positive, negative and positive shapes from which you cut the paper like Matisse did. All that fascinates me, and it's in those. So can we go to the next one?
Absolutely. We have the Utah woman.
Yes. Okay. This is a huge mural commissioned by Zions Bank here in Utah, and it was it's 6,000 square feet. It's 55 feet tall, and then whatever wide. Each panel is 10 foot. There are 300 heads on this, like the other mural, the work in progress mural. And this was done by about 250 different artists who are, 90% of them are non-artists, people who work in different areas. About 10% are professional artists. And this was done, 50% of this mural was done during the pandemic. And I can tell you it's really hard. Looking back on it now, I just don't know how we pulled it off, but we did. That my son created an app so that we could do the collaging of it digitally. This is not a collage that's done physically like the work in progress. It's done digitally, and then it was printed onto panels and then put on the side of a 7-story building. The thing that is odd about this mural is that the idea that we started with in the spring of 2019 was that we would do a mural that was oh no, it wasn't 2019, it was 2018. We would do a mural that celebrated voting rights, the passing of the 19th Amendment for women's vote in America. And the nice little caveat for Utah is that actually women in Utah got the vote 150 years ago. And so we were going to be celebrating that and talking about Utah women specifically instead of an international group. We're going to talk about women who were diverse and interesting and in different fields and different economic brackets and so forth in the state. And of course, now in hindsight, it's like it was some sort of prescient moment because so much has been about voting rights and registration and, being present in an election and so forth. So, it became, oddly, relevant in a way that we never expected. And also to deal with, something that is this massive a project in a pandemic. How do you do that? You make all kinds of discoveries about the capacity of the internet to foster something like this and ways of running workshops online and so forth. So it occupies a unique place for me that it just amazes me that it happened, that we got it done, and that it that it exists for the time that we have just experienced, because it has been such a time of change and stress and anticipation. And I think this mural stands in a unique place. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also exhibited in a very, very large format, right? So even if the images were done small, it's like 7 stories. Is that correct? Or?
Yes, each woman is about 12 to 15 feet tall, basically, if she was scaled up. So the head is about 2 times normal size. So it's they don't appear that way because you see it at a distance, but that is how it is. So and it was very important to us to balance the ethnicity and also to include women who had experienced homelessness or domestic abuse, to raise those issues, raise those questions, and include that in women's achievements. So Can we go to the next one?
I just have a quick question, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure.
About the apple at the top of the slide and the significance of it.
Well, that's wonderful, Amy Jorgensen's piece. That's a portrait of Amy at the very apex. That she is the curator and director of the museum I mentioned earlier, the Granary in Ephraim. And she did this wonderful film where there's an apple on a string swinging back and forth, and her eyes are following the apple back and forth, and her hair is in pigtails, and she's in a gingham shirt, and she's this kind of quintessential American woman. And it just is hilarious. I don't want to even put words around it because it means everything. It certainly means Eve, and the idea of this swinging apple in her eyes are just so brilliant. I hope that piece is online and you can see it, because it's a wonderful little video, and it really knocks it out of the park, I think. Anyway, so Amy had to be at the top, and with that apple, and I don't know who's holding the string on that apple. That's another thing that intrigues me. So yeah, have a think about that. Yeah, any other questions? Okay. Let's go to the next one then.
Yeah, then I'll move backwards. I can move to Dennis Hopper if you like.
Yeah. Okay. This is a work that is was commissioned by the city, the RDA in Salt Lake City, and it's in the parking lot of a camera and tech supplier called Pictureline, and I like to very much. I like this mural. It really seems to work from all of the things that we had to achieve, and it meant working with the people that were adjacent, particularly Pictureline, and they were so gracious and cared for us so well. We had they supplied us with ice cream and water all the time, and really took good care of us. And also, we're very much involved in the way the mural finally finished. And I love this process. I love working with someone in the city, or in a woman who's cutting her first stencil. I love the fact of the exchange, and the fact that you give way on ideas, and that you make the mural will become better for it. And so the conversations with Jens Nielsen, who runs this particular place, Pictureline, was so amazing, because it changed the mural. It made a better mural of it. And I think that kind of input and that sort of working with another person makes a project go exponentially better, and especially when it's in the public arena. Going back to the Utah Women mural, at the end of the mural, it was 9 panels. Now it's 11 panels. There was an outcry from the Republican people in Utah that we had underrepresented Republicans. And so rather than get sort of salty about that, we immediately engendered some workshops and did a survey asking for input, and added 2 panels. And so I think it's that you work with, not against. You enfold, you engage, you embrace, you add, instead of standing on your hind legs and getting angry about input from someone who is outside the project. It was very important on the SLC Pepper that people would come and say, you don't have so-and-so, could you put them in the mural? And we did. So yeah, that is a very important component of a community mural, I think. So yeah, can we go to the next and the next?
Yeah, then we are moving more and more backwards. We have Minnie and after the divorce.
Yeah, and is our time slow, or how are we doing?
I think we have around 7 minutes left if Microsoft is going to shut it off.
Okay. Yeah, let me just talk briefly about the use of vinyl. There's my whole body of work since 2000 has done patchwork canvases. So I paint canvas, having stretched it on a piece of plywood, and then I do a drawing, and I cut the drawing up and make a pattern, and then I patch these pieces together of painted canvas. It occurred to me very quickly that I could use vinyl. I didn't know if it would work, but it would give me a clear surround or a clear interlude. Having a clear interlude on the front face of a painting allows you to investigate the idea of the palimpsest, the next layer underneath it. It could be a backdrop, or it could be an earlier painting, or it could be part of the same painting. So the works that are up in the Gazzelli house now, they have, in some cases, 4 layers, and you're looking through several layers in this palimpsest situation to either earlier ideas or something that forms a backdrop. It also allows the composition to change. So as you pass the picture, the composition shifts slightly, which is another play on the idea of film or animation. So probably that's all I can say. I mean, this is, the Minnie Mouse one on the left is Minnie after her divorce and before she knew she was pregnant, which is a moment in a woman's life, that some of us have experienced, which makes me laugh. So that's what that is about. The one on the right is That's All, Folks. That's the end of one of the Looney Tunes. The phrase is from a Looney Tunes cartoon at the end. So all of these are Minnie pregnant, and she wasn't married to Mickey. What a scandal. Who knew? And also Mickey and Minnie have to be said to be African American. So our American icon is basically, untried in that territory, which I think is very interesting. Anything else there?
Well, we can try and squeeze in a slide or 2 more. We have
Picasso is a double layer, and that's at the Gazzelli at the moment. So if you want to do a walk round, it might be that you could get hold of them and ask if any of the students are interested in seeing that show. There's more detailing, of some of these pieces. This is the one I didn't know if it would work, and it was terrifying because I didn't know if curves and vinyl would work. And those are film strips, shards of Picasso's paintings, and it's as if Picasso is dreaming those, even though he's deceased. So yeah. And
it's part of a larger series of many art historical revisitings. There's Anna Hirsch, Louise Nevelson, and many others.
Yeah, Picasso, Ray Johnson, and Matisse. Yeah. So yes, and that's a straight. We probably should have talked more about that, but alas. Anyway, yeah, and it was a process extension for me because I had to enter each of those artists' practice and find something that resonated with me, and it just was happenstance. They all did collage work, and so that went with the idea of patching these canvases together. But also, their methodologies were very different. So with the Ray Johnson, he did collage work, but he did it on kind of pieces of cardboard. So I had to find a way of representing cardboard in cloth. And so I layered different kinds of canvases together with rabbit skin glue and then cut them and painted them. So I made cloth cardboard, if you like. That extended my process. So these paintings are very like the student kind of dilemma that we used to face at the Slade, where the tutor would say, go to the National Gallery and paint that painting, do a copy of that painting. And at that time you could, I don't know if you still can. And you did learn a lot about mixing color and about composition and all of those things. But it was something that we all tried to avoid like mad. And this process for me was like that, visiting these artists and trying to find something about their process that I could either learn from or extend my practice with. So yeah, that's that. Do you want to hit any others, or should we ask questions and see if we get shut down?
Either way, I think actually the meeting can continue as long as we like. So it's up to you, but we can see if there's any questions. If there's probably not, maybe, but and related to anything, I suppose. But we can move back as well. Oh, I see a question here. Serena has a question.
Yeah.
Hi, Jann. Thank you so much for talking to us, and Louise. It's been really good and insightful. I just wondered, because we've been looking through Picasso, kind of feminine inspirations, and also Disney. I was wondering if you had any artists or any icons that you would say inspired you with your work.
Yeah, I suppose one of the things about pop art was, like artists always do, they turned to context. So, various people fell in love with packaging. I mean, New York was much more about advertising and so forth. Turning to advertising is almost a still life. And in England, it was popular entertainment more, perhaps. But for me, I don't know. I mean, I suppose I just dip everywhere. I mean, to me, I guess donuts would be still life. But donuts were my history, so I looked at that. I love the work of Richard Lindner, and I've done a number of figures related to his work, and I don't know. It's like I turn to art history for the richness of the education that it offers me. I mean, yes, the word inspiring, I guess, but it's more, I don't know, it's more vigorous than inspired. Inspired puts you in that kind of recessive position, and it's more like gobbling up stuff, that something I just am, I go into a frenzy of delight about it. And so as far as other artists are concerned, I mean, that changed from, one thing to another as time went on. At one point I liked Reg Butler's sculpture, and then I went off them, and liked Leger, and then I went off them, and, turned to, early artists that were doing collage work like Hannah Hoch, or, some of the work of Picasso and other artists. I can't, I mean, I don't know. I like really odd things, that I don't so much, account for, that I'm a follower of a particular artist. I'm more a follower of ideas. I mean, when I was at the Slade, Harold Cohen was teaching, and his approach to art was highly intellectual, and I just thrived in the atmosphere of the Q&A that he thrust upon the students. And he tore students down. I mean, a lot of them really lost their way under his tutelage. But for me, it was really, really useful, and really forced me to, think carefully about every mark I made, and that the mark counted, and it wasn't indifferent, that it had a purpose and a meaning and a focus. That's why I kind of flounder on the Maid, because I didn't intellectually follow the idea of turning her from a bunny girl to a maid. And so there's a gap in that piece that I can't now sit down and say how I got to the Maid. Whereas usually I remember exactly the narrative of getting from A to B in any particular instance in a work. I can tell you all sorts of things about Picasso and how those things came about, because I remember when I do that process. So yeah, it's a hard question for me, inspiration, because I think I balk at the idea of inspiration. I maybe I'm just horribly competitive or something. Anyway, yeah, let me think about that, and I'll make a list for you.
Thank you. And if it's okay, I just had another question. After looking at kind of your life-size pieces, and also the donuts, the use of textiles a lot, and in all of your murals using figures, there's kind of the aspect of different clothing and costume, and also the use of Twiggy. I was just wondering, did you have an interest in fashion? Was that a good push into going into the art career?
Yes, absolutely. And I probably could have gone towards fashion equally. my resistance to that would be the fractiousness and yearly changeability within fashion, which I find fascinating. But I wouldn't want to be a purveyor of that, I think. But yes, definitely. And I still, I mean, when we went to bookshops and the magazine area was as full as it was, say, 10 years ago, with magazines like Wad and Flaunt and these things that were quasi-cultural fashion art magazines, Escapus and things like that, those were more inspiring, to use your word, to me than straight up art books. That there's more there, more content, more relevancy, more immediacy as far as stimulus was concerned. And so, yes, I have an eye on that. Fashion per se, especially now, is nothing short of irritating. Not that the fashion is irritating, it's just that the frivolity of it, makes me feel like a terrible Puritan, because we have so many problems to solve that the fashion industry just is irrelevant and irritating at the moment. That we've got to fix the planet. And people strutting their stuff and buying a belt for $5,000 is just awful. So fashion, in a way, is both my enemy and my inspiration, if you like. And I feel that certainly the language of fashion is embedded in everything I do in terms of tailoring or sewing skills. I'm fourth generation seamstress. My great grandmother was a self-supporting woman who was a seamstress. So, yes, fashion is really a really interesting area, provocative as well as inspiring. And so I think, the idea of working through those images that you see in textile work and adornment the corsets are all about that. The corsets are the fact of the natural thing of stretching a canvas, being imprisoned as a woman in this, and yet women still, as they should, will enjoy the wearing of a garment like that. Why shouldn't they? Well, I'd like her to make it herself and not, kind of have to pay a lot of money for it or something. But certainly, I find all of that intriguing. And of course, this is a faux torso. It's a faux nude. For me. And I should say that in 1997, when I came to the United States, it was very interesting to me to try to reconfigure the nude, the still life, the portrait, and to try to look at the landscape in a different way, to try to find new form to do that. And so these corsets are very much about Venus de Milo, getting rid of the head, because who needs a head? And so focusing on the female torso, but the torture of it, basically, because the male gaze and all those kind of cliches that we almost don't even have to talk about. But so that interests me, and of course all of the language in there is bits and pieces from corsetry and straps and ties and all that. So yeah, definitely in that area. And it does complete your earlier question a little bit better than I did. So yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, pleasure.
We have two more questions. Maybe we go with Francesco first and then Rocco.
Good evening. Thank you very much for the presentation. And I have a question that is quite a basic one, I think. I was interested in the sort of reaction that your public pieces had in like the murals, and if you had any other story similar to the complaint you received from the Republicans, or maybe signs of appreciation that you had from the public.
Yeah, I think both, and I think both are really important. And the support and the delight. I mean, there's a woman whose family I went to the mural to show it to somebody, and there was another family there, and they were just so gratified that their aunt had been represented on the mural. And I think, it's important. I mean, you immediately know that if you do something like this, that the first question out of the box will be, how did you choose, and why isn't so and so on there? In other words, we immediately go to the glass half empty. And so all the time that you're working on something like this, you have to be, I think, open to additions, which we were, and also open to criticism. And it keeps you in balance, because you actually have to double check and check what you do at every point, and work out, hey, this is a birthday present for 300 women, but that means that 1.5 million women living now are not on this mural, and they're going to be unhappy, and they should be on the mural. So you have to find what language that says we have areas of representation, and we only could put 5 medical people on, because we still have to have people from the theater, people from the legal profession, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very sobering, and a very, you have to be entirely respectful, and it's a good lesson in humanity, so I feel very constructive about both criticism and inclusion, and it's about inclusion. So, not being defensive, and also, going straight for, the understanding of point of view. And that's what we have to do. That's our job right now. And it's, we have huge challenges. We have to listen, and we have to hope that people who disagree with us will be as generous in their listening of ourselves. So yeah, it's a tough one, but yeah, we weathered it.
Thank you.
And then I think we had a question from Rocco, if he's still there.
Yeah. Hi, thank you for this talk. It's been very interesting. Sorry to bring up Sergeant Pepper. I know you must be tired of talking about it. But I was wondering, with McCartney creating this alter ego for the band's music, how involved was he and the whole band in like the visual aspect of the album? Or was it more of a collaborative effort between you two, or did they kind of let you and Peter Blake take it in your own direction?
Well, you have to understand that there are many points of view on this, and I have one, and Paul McCartney has another, and Peter Blake has another. Nigel has another. I'm sure if Michael Cooper was alive, he would have still another. And they may be all facets of the same truth, or they may be revisionist, after the fact. They may be poor memory or good memory. We're talking a lot about memory these days, about how memory is very fragile. And I take the view that memory may be very fragile for some, but I would say it's not for me. And the framing of it, in my perspective, was this: that we went to EMI, we met with both Paul and Robert Fraser while they were recording. They were laying down tracks, and there was a kind of area of groupies sitting down listening to the music, and we were presented with the then cover, which was by Simon and Marika, and they're known collectively as The Fool. And it was a finished piece of artwork, I would say. And I don't know who was in support of it, but we were asked to comment on it. And we obviously, both Peter and I, were cautious in so doing, because we didn't know who we would be offending. But Robert Fraser said at that point, I think Jann and Peter should do the cover. And so to that end, and still not determined yet that we would or would not do it, we decided to have a meeting at our both home and studios, which took place, and Paul and Robert came. So we had no discussion with John or George or Ringo. The discussion was only with Paul. Paul remembers it that he did a drawing and told us that it should be like X. I would stoutly contest that. And he may have done drawings. When he did them, I can't comment on. But the fact of the matter, as far as I'm concerned, and I think as far as Peter's concerned, is that the discussion that we had at our studios was the genesis. When I remember things, I always remember them in a context. I know where we were standing at the time. And so the input from the Beatles was largely focused on the idea that they would be the Sgt. Pepper band and that they would have these costumes, they would be holding instruments. Peter's concept was the crowd. He had done that before in collage pieces. It's an easy way to get to having a collection of people, whether they're in a crowd or just a grouping or standing about. And so the idea of doing a crowd was relevant and within his work. And also within his work was the fact that he would ask his students to cite their hero and do a painting of a hero rather than the life model that was available to them. And so again, that is part of the body of Peter's work. He would have done it as a collage. And my input is, let's do this life size, let's make a set, because that's the way I thought. And I think life size. So the idea initially was that my life-size figures would be the front row with the Beatles, because we didn't know then that we could get if we could get the waxworks. I preferred to get the waxworks than have my figures, literally, because they were more realistic. And the idea was to fool the eye with the crowd of two-dimensional heads eliding by the masked by the front row of three-dimensional figures. So the idea of having two Sods figures and then the colossally funny idea of having the Beatles figures was just, really fascinating. So that came to pass, but only at the last minute. So we didn't know that would happen until very late on in the process. And further, as I said before, the lettering, I didn't really want to be a substitute, kind of stuck on by a graphic designer. And there was this American graphic designer guy hanging around who was a bit of a chump, and we certainly didn't want him doing it. So the idea of the lettering really belongs to me. The residue of the figures is only the old lady and Shirley Temple that were left. In some of the outtakes, there's some of my other figures around. So does that answer your question? So I would say input was minimal. Also the input of, hey, we said the crowd should be their heroes, and would they pick their heroes so that we could get photographs done and enlargements done? And they picked about a third of the heads that are there. Peter and I picked most of the remaining 2/3. I think Robert Fraser picked a few. That's my version.
Perfect. Thank you. Were you going to include Jesus in the background, but then
one of John's requests was to include Jesus Christ and Hitler. I want you to imagine for a moment what would have happened to this quasi-icon had Hitler been remaining in the actual image. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, I think we have time for one more question, maybe, if there's any takers.
Hi. Sorry. I was wondering if you could maybe say more about textile, and if you actually think about it as it has traditionally been ascribed as a feminine material, textile and fabric, and maybe, I don't know, link it to Old Lady, which I would love to hear more about.
Oh yeah, for sure. Textile, yes, and textile as collage, and textile also as the patchwork quilt, because the patchwork quilt quote that I love and has been something that I've thought about many times is an anonymous quilt maker saying, the whole of my life is tied up in that patchwork, my husband's waistcoat, my daughter's christening gown, a piece of my ball gown. The idea that it's an assembly of disparate things. Just to jump sideways a little bit, in 1997, what I wanted to do was to find a way to fuse the idea of film strips with separate images in the film strip, a storyboard, comic books, graphic novels, and patchwork quilts, because I saw them all as time sequence events or time sequence materials. So going to the textile question, that soft, warm, yielding. I can work on cardboard or paper or a canvas and make three-dimensional things or two-dimensional things, but I really resist hard surfaces. So the yielding quality of textiles is very important to me, and the kind of the warmth of it. And as far as, feminine topics or feminine materials, yes, because these were the borderline artistic, creative areas that women could work in. They could pick it up and put it down. You can do a tapestry a little bit and put it down because the baby's crying. You can, do a bit of lace making. You can do a bit of, a patchwork. You can even do a bit of clay and put something down. But it's those marginalized, what we call craft materials. I see no difference in materials. Tony Cairo once said to me, everything is the stuff of art. And if you put me on a desert island with masking tape and tin cans, I would do art with those. It's that, your material, yes, follows the idea for me, but also that the material is immaterial. It doesn't have a good, better, best thing. And it annoyed me tremendously in the 60s when Palazzi said to me, oh yeah, you should take your sculptures and cast them in bronze. I mean, he so missed the point, and so, I feel that both the physicality of it, I don't know if that's particularly feminine. I'm sure men respond to soft, warm couches and things too. But that is really important to me. And also, of course, it's rule breaking, and I'm drawn to that. It was in the 60s to move towards textile, and it still is a little bit, because each time a piece sells to a museum, it's very hard for them to buy my work because they feel that it is going to have one big headache as far as conservation is concerned. So yeah, you be careful what you wish for. It's hard to make that work in the grand scheme of the preconceived notions about art even now. But still, to me, textiles is such an expressive form. And the one on the left, the string crazy hired man, it has so much potential for backlighting, for layering, for putting in the vinyl panels. Nobody's put vinyl panels in paintings before, and I just love the fact that you can go down absolutely new pathways and establish things that have never been before. I mean, that's a big driver for me, to try to find a new path. So yes, I love textiles, and I'm still very passionate about it.
Thank you.
Yeah, brilliant. I've heard you also describe the same notion of the weaving, the patchwork into the wrinkles of the old lady. Is that right? That you can tell her story, or I could let you explain it better than I can, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the idea behind the one on the left, everybody says it looks like she came out of Psycho. That was exactly the opposite of my intention. I mean, I wanted to make old age look beautiful. It's based on my great-grandmother, and I wanted to put color in the face and story in the face, and to say that a fold in the face is no different than a fold on a garment, that why is it something that, we fight? I mean, our whole life, we are not the same one year to the next. We are so different from our, 2-month-old self, or our 4-year-old self, or our 10-year-old self. Why should change be so terrible? And I you know, I mean, I've been puzzled and worried about time ever since I was 9 years old, and, you know, trying to figure it out. I'm still trying to figure it out. And, you know, I think probably that was something to do with the film industry, because I saw time repeated. You know, now we have action replay, but then I was seeing people film, you know, take 25 of, you know, answering a question or something, you know, so time was immaterial. So yeah, it's a focus topic for me, aging, and it was of concern to me in 1962 when I was, I don't know how old I was, 20. So yeah.
Yeah, and on this same topic of time, I suppose I'm getting a warning that we have 5 minutes left before the meeting shuts down. So if there's no more questions, then I'm really happy to have hosted this event, and it's been really, really nice to speak to you. And I'm sure that all of the other students have found this to be a really engaging moment to speak directly to someone that we've been looking at in our course. So.
Well, and if there are follow-up questions, don't hesitate to send them on. I'm happy to you know, natter away on mail.
We're getting some clapping. I didn't even know it was possible.
Well, thank you so much for setting this up and monitoring it and making it happen. It's lovely to talk to you all and picture where you are and think about that area of England. You're in a great place.
Yeah, thank you. It's been my pleasure. So.